Today's episode of TuDiabetes Talks is sponsored by our friends at Lilly Diabetes. As a leader in diabetes care for over 90 years, Lilly Diabetes provides treatment options and resources for people facing the challenges of diabetes, and they understand the value community and peer-to-peer support plays in diabetes management.
This is TuDiabetes Talks, a weekly broadcast of news, interviews, and community chat, brought to you by TuDiabetes and the Diabetes Hands Foundation. Never miss an episode by subscribing to the audio podcast in iTunes, or head over to TuDiabetes.org/talks to see the archive of video interviews.
Welcome to another episode of TuDiabetes Talks. Don't forget that all of our episodes are available in podcast formats. And if you want to go ahead and look for us, go to iTunes and look for us under Diabetes Hands Foundation or TuDiabetes Talks. My name is Mila Ferrer. I am the Director of Community for Diabetes Hands Foundation. Today, we have a very good friend of our community, and I'm pretty sure you have seen his face a lot lately on social media. We're going to be talking about Bright Spots and Landmines. Ooh, a name that when I saw it originally, I didn't understood what it was. But once I did, I really, really like it. He is the author of this new amazing book that we have here. His name is Adam Brown. Of course, we all know Adam. Welcome, Adam. As we all know, Adam is super smart. He's super into his type 1 diabetes management, and he's the senior editor at Diatribe. Welcome, Adam. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us from San Francisco. Even though our offices are in Berkeley, pretty close to you guys, I live in the East Coast, so I'm pretty far away from you. So, Adam, thank you so much for saying yes to join our our interview. And thank you for sending me the book. It has been an amazing read. I was telling Adam that I enjoyed it, and we are sharing some tidbits with my 14-year-old type 1 teen because I think he needs to learn as much as he can. So let's get started. Everyone wants to know a little bit more about how you came up with the book and about you. So let's start with your diabetes story. When were you diagnosed, Adam?
At age 12, so back in 2001. So classic kind of teenage diagnosis, losing weight, feeling sluggish, drinking a lot of water, went to the doctor, you have diabetes. My grandfather had type 2, but it was totally surprising to us. And, classic, like crying in the room and feeling like, what's going to happen to me? And I write a bit about this in the introduction, just as like a way to frame the book. So.
And how were your teen years? I always ask this question to adults who have gone through type 1 and teen years, because I need to learn a lot about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did pretty typical, which is to say pretty poorly. My A1C was in the kind of 8 to 9% range, and I'd always remember feeling like a failure at doctor's appointments and feeling judged. And I didn't, diabetes was one more thing on the list of things to do. So I kind of, checked my blood sugar a few times a day, but it was never really a priority. And I think, two of the big problems were, one, like continuous glucose monitoring just wasn't available. So looking back on it, and I think that would have been a real eye-opener for me. Second was just the food advice that we got at diagnosis, which is I think what a lot of people with diabetes hear. You can eat whatever you want as long as you take insulin for it. And I think that was challenging advice to give, especially to a teenager, because it's just a blank check not to make any food changes. And that would have saved a lot of hassle. And then the third was just this idea of like, this is this long-term condition. So if you don't take care of it now, it's going to have bad outcomes in many years. And one of the things I try to focus on is like, no one told us about like the today reasons to manage blood sugar, like why does keeping my blood sugar in range matter today? I'm happier, I'm less stressed, I'm a better athlete, a better thinker, a better writer. And so I think the teenage version of me would have maybe resonated with that a little bit more, but I was totally a typical teenager, crappy diet, didn't do well with my diabetes, and I made it through, but I probably could have saved a lot of years of frustration.
I we're going to go back to that today motto that you have, because that's something that I really enjoyed, and you talk about it in the book. So how does Adam get to the diabetes world? How you get to start working at Diatribe, and what are you doing there now? I'm going to be very honest. I think you are super smart. And for me, I find it like interesting to see someone as young as you to be so involved, to be so I like the way you do your critical thinking, and I'm glad that our community have people like you and all the guys that work at Diatribe, because I was reading last night while doing my research, and you guys are all so smart. I'm like, oh my God, I feel so good because we have smart people behind us, like giving us so many good information. How was that start on Diatribe?
It's a great question. So thank you for the kind words. And so I was a classic college junior trying to figure out, what to do with my life. And I saw an internship for a diabetes writing job in San Francisco. And the way that I was searching was I knew I wanted to live in California. So I searched for jobs in California and I found this job and I was like, I have diabetes, but I don't know if I could write about it for a whole summer. That sounds kind of scary and maybe kind of boring, but I applied and then didn't hear anything for a month, and then, emailed and got the internship and at Close Concerns and Diatribe. And it was a blast. I got to learn about diabetes every day and write about it. And I felt like we had so much potential to help people and help companies working in the field of diabetes. So I had a blast, and then joined full time when I graduated and have been here ever since. So it's funny how things work out, because in college I would have scoffed at someone who said, you're going to write about diabetes for a living. And that's kind of where it's been. And so every day I focus on diabetes technology in my work at Close Concerns. And then at Diatribe, I kind of share what I learn about my own diabetes in my column. So,
and we are big fans of diabetes technology. We do use an insulin pump. We use CGM. And as you mentioned before, it's an eye opener. I think it makes diabetes more real, and it makes my son more aware that, hey, I have a trend going up or going down. There's something that I need to do, instead of being just guessing how my blood sugar is, or I don't want to check now.
Right.
So it is a life changer. So this book, let's start by analyzing the title. When I saw it, Bright Spots and Landmines, I'm like, interesting. Why that name? After you start reading it, you understand it. But if you see the book, you're like, what is he going to be talking about here?
Right. Yeah. So Bright Spots and Landmines is kind of the framework of the book. And the way to think about it is as follows. I found this idea of bright spots. I actually didn't invent bright spots. I found it in a great book on behavior change called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. And the idea of bright spots is what's working and how can we do more of that? So it sounds so basic and simple, but when I read this book and I saw this chapter on bright spots, I was like, oh my God, this is what we never do in diabetes. Like, what are the things that I'm doing on an individual level that work? And then how can I do more of those? So how can I have more days where I do things that work, or more meals where I eat foods that keep my blood sugar in range, or when I feel super low stressed or super motivated to manage my diabetes, like, why is that? And then how can I do that more often? And so that's the idea of bright spots. And the book has 43 bright spots, and they're in 4 chapters: food, mindset, exercise, and sleep. And, this idea of today reasons to manage my blood sugar is one mindset bright spot that I talk about. Walking after meals is an exercise bright spot. Eating less than 30 grams of carbs at one time is a food bright spot. So the thing about bright spots that I try to focus on is it needs to be actionable. So it's got to be like something that you can do, and it needs to be sustainable. So like not eating is not a bright spot, because like you can't sustain not eating. And it's got to be in my control and changeable. So, bad weather is not an exercise landmine, because the weather's out of my control. And so that's the idea of bright spots. And then landmines is diabetes landmines is something I wrote about in Diatribe a couple of years ago. And this is the converse. So this is the mistakes, the mess ups, the things that I do, the things I the traps I fall into all the time that explode into these out of range blood sugars. And we all, the one I always point to in the book, because everyone can relate to it, is this idea of the hypoglycemia binge. Your blood sugar's low, you go to the fridge, you're super hungry, you eat way too much, and then you go really high after, and then maybe you take a rage bolus, and then you go low. And so the key with diabetes landmines is to identify them and then build a plan of attack. So like, how am I going to avoid my diabetes landmines? And we all have different diabetes landmines, which is a big focus of the book is, what are your bright spots and landmines? And there's question guides of each chapter. But for hypoglycemia, for me, it's one, not using hypoglycemia as an excuse to overeat, period. Like, I just have that as a rule. So I'm not allowed to do that. The second is just having hypoglycemia automatic corrections that are unappealing to overeat, and I can change the amount just to fit what I need. So for me, that's glucose tabs, and they don't taste amazing, but like, that's the point. They're not supposed to be a treat. It's supposed to be like, what do I need right now to go from 60 to 100? Like, I know I need 2 glucose tabs. And so that's the idea of diabetes landmines, is if we can identify these stumbling blocks and mistakes and pitfalls that we all make, and I tend to make the same ones repeatedly, and then build a plan of attack, maybe we can have less landmines every day. So that's the idea of the book, and there are 16 landmines in the book. The hypoglycemia binge is just one of them. And so, yeah.
And I think we all know what our landmines are, but as you mentioned, we don't have a plan to work on them the right way. Like, because we all know, he just went low, let's get some ice cream or something. And that afterwards, you might get a high blood sugar. But if you say, okay, instead of having the entire ice cream, if you want to treat, let's go ahead and do half of that portion. And I think we all have to make that mind shift and start working on our plan. I have always said that type 1 diabetes needs a lot of organization and planification. And this is part of what you are giving us the tools to start making our work plan for every single day. So after people read the book, what do you want for them to accomplish, or at least to say, hey, I did understand this. This was Adam's message to me.
Awesome. Well, I would love to hear what you thought of it, but here are some of the things I hope people take away. I mean, one is, if you have to pick something to focus on, it's bright spots. So what are the things you're doing well that you can do more often? What happens on your best days with diabetes, and how can you have more days like that? So one is, I hope people bring that lens to their own diabetes. This is a book it's kind of like my operating manual for how I try to live my life with diabetes. So the things that work for me, the things that don't work for me, and how I avoid them. And so I hope people pick up some nuggets that they hadn't tried before, like a new breakfast, or a new way of thinking about exercise, or some bedroom changes that they can make to sleep better. So there are like hundreds of those kinds of tips in this book, and I do hope people take away some that are useful. And I would be surprised if someone read the book and didn't find something that they found useful. So I think that's second. And then the last one is just, there are these question guides at the end of each chapter in the book to help people find their bright spots and landmines. And so I do hope people will look at those questions and think about them and try to identify their own bright spots and landmines. So those are the 3 things. But in terms of feeling, like, I want people to feel like uplifted, positive, inspired. You can do this. That's why, like, there's a light bulb on the cover. That's why the colors are really bright. I really hope it like gives people a little wind in their sails, because diabetes is just like, can be such a drag sometimes. So
I know it can be very overwhelming. I really like the today theory. I have to work today, but I have to do that every single day. And if sometimes, I don't know, you're talking to parents and you're like, oh, we're going to the doctor, I'm so scared about my A1C. My husband and I, we have had this conversation, like, we don't feel that way because we know that every day we have been doing our duty, our work. So if today I'm doing the things the way I need to do them, I shouldn't have a surprise at the end of the 3-month checkup. So working on that today, making sure that if we have a high, a low, we try to fix that, and figure out what's happening. It could be that we're stuck in a landmine, or maybe we're having great days. So what are we doing that it's working? So identifying that and using that every single day instead of like doing that long-term plan, especially with teens and younger kids. You can't talk to them about, hey, your future health.
Right.
You want to know now. Okay, you want to go out to play baseball, you have to check your blood sugar. Is it in range? Is it fine? Okay, go ahead and let's do it. We have to talk to them in ways that they can relate to their present, not talk to them about, hey, whenever you're 20, well, they won't understand that. So what are the main takeaways from each chapter? We're going to go pretty quick through all of them. You mentioned that you have food, mindset, exercise, and sleep. So let's start with chapter 1, which is food. And I want to show you guys, this is a book that is very easy to read because Adam made some amazing work with the images. So you can see year 1. And it's a book that you can take to the gym, take to the beach, and read it because it's very easy. So what are we going to be learning on this first chapter, Adam?
Yeah. So the first bright spot in the chapter is eating less than 30 grams of carbs at one time. And this is first in the book for a reason. It's kind of like, if I could pick one bright spot in the book that's had the biggest impact on my diabetes, over the last decade, it's that one. And it's also the complete opposite of what our doctors told us when we were diagnosed. And so it's really informed by, 50,000 hours wearing CGM and learning what foods work for me and how much to eat and what types of foods to eat. And so that bright spot talks about why eating fewer carbs has benefited me. I think one of the funny things is people tend to focus on like what is lost. So like, oh, I don't get to eat bread or potatoes anymore or rice. But I focus on what's gained, which is more time in range, less insulin dosing mistakes, less stress, less worry, all these positives that come from the choices about food. So I think that, like, if people read one bright spot in the book, like, that's the one I would send them to probably. And that bright spot also shares, like, here's exactly what I eat. Like, here are the, 30 things that I eat for breakfast and lunch and dinner and snacks and hypoglycemia corrections and desserts. And so I hope people take that away. Yeah.
What I actually eat, it's there.
Yeah. And so just so people have a sense, because I have gotten some emails about this. So the PDF online, that's at diatribe.org/brightspots, that's in full color, just like that. The paperback on Amazon, that's $6. It's black and white inside. And the reason is because the cost is like 60% less selling it that way. So if you want the color version, get the PDF, or get the Kindle version, which is $1.99, or there's a full color version on Amazon, but it's $16.99, and it's kind of hard to find. So you can search like full color edition Bright Spots and Landmines if you want. But just so people like don't order the paperback and are like disappointed, I wanted to make that really clear, because actually a huge focus of this project has been like keeping the cost as absolutely low as possible so that anyone who wants to get this can get it for the lowest price. Okay, so the other things in the food chapter, I think a lot of it is about my food behavior. So like the silly mistakes that I make, like overeating at meals. Like how do I avoid overeating at meals when like the food is so tasty and I just want like a few more bites? And so things like filling up on broth and filling up on veggies and going for seconds on veggies first, or filling half my plate with vegetables at least at every dinner. So I think a lot of the chapter, or putting snacks like up in high places in cabinets so they're not in visible sight, putting berries like way out so they're always available and I can just snack on a few. So making the right choices easier and the unhelpful choices harder, I think, is also a big focus of the food chapter, and all the little tips and tricks and plate size and placement and things like that.
That's very important, plate size. I have to tell you, we went out to purchase a new dinner set for our house. When we came home, we were so like upset about the size of the dinner plate. Adam, I'm not lying to you, it's huge. So I told my husband, you know what, there's no way we can do these. You know why? Because if you see, even though it's the right portion for you, but you see that half of your plate is empty, like you're going to say, hey, I need to eat more. And we went ahead and exchanged it because I was like, no, there's no way we can eat. They were so big. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. And this is funny. So there's a lot of really good research on this from psychology, and Brian Wansink is the guy to read. There's this book called Mindless Eating that's so good if you're at all interested in this. And I talk a little bit about it in the book. And there's one picture in the book showing the same amount of food on a huge plate and a small plate, and it's like totally mind blowing.
Yeah.
But like 8-inch dinner plates are great, but this also works in the flip side. So like I have huge salad bowls, like enormous salad bowls, so that I completely feel how it can kind of work both ways. But I think generally like eating less is so helpful with diabetes, but especially at dinner time, because this is another bright spot in the food chapter. Like eating a lighter dinner and having more food earlier in the day is just really helpful for flattening out the overnights. So that's just.
We were very happy that a lot of your bright spots are things that we already do. We eat a very heavy lunch and breakfast, but then at night, even though my kids play sports, we go on the lighter side, precisely because of that, because they're going to go to sleep, their blood sugar can go low, or we want to make sure that he's going to sleep and we as parents can sleep also. And we have been doing that for a long time. Another tip that we have been doing since we started using the CGM, it's dosing 20 to 25 minutes prior to start eating. So once we see that blood sugar starts going down, we know that we won't have that super peak that drives us crazy. So we were very excited. We were like, yeah, we're doing good. So that was good. And that's another thing. If even though you think or you're pretty active and proactive on your management, there's always things that you can learn and things that you can see, like, and give yourself a pat in the back, like, hey, I'm doing things the right way. For us was like, okay, cool. So let's move to chapter 2. Mindset. Oh my God. And this is where I was like very happy. I really like that today approach that I just mentioned. Can having this approach help us also prevent this diabetes burnout that it's so common and frequently among our community?
Yeah, so it's funny, this idea of today versus long term. There's an amazing book for people who like psychology or into this stuff. There's a book called The Time Paradox. It's written by Philip Zimbardo, who did the famous Stanford prison experiment. And I had actually a bright spot dedicated to this idea, but some of the editors felt like the mindset chapter was pretty long and getting repetitive. So I actually cut that. The idea of this book is that we all have a dominant time perspective. So, this is the way that we interpret events in our life or make choices. And the main ones are past, present, and future. And so all of us obviously have all of those perspectives, but most of us are dominant in one. And when I read this book, this idea totally blew my mind because it's so well researched and presented. But the idea is, I think avoid long-term complications is a very good motivator for people who are future-oriented, which is not teenagers, right? Teenagers are not that future-oriented like when I was diagnosed. But what they argue in this book is that if you're too dominant in one time perspective, there's negative consequences. And so I think with diabetes, those of us, I tend to be very future-oriented now, which I think comes with education and learning about diabetes. But if you're too dominant in future orientation, like it's easy to burn out on diabetes because you're always worried about what's coming and planning. And so this idea of like today reasons, I think, is really compelling. And that's this idea, present orientation, which is something they talk about in the book. And then there's also past orientation. So there's past positive and past negative. And this is Bright Spots and Landmines, so, do you look back on your past experiences with a positive lens? Like if I say, what are the most pivotal moments of your life? Like, do you come up with a bunch of negative moments or positive moments? And the awesome thing that they argue in this book is that all of these, your time perspective is changeable. So you can do different things to change your perspective. And so I think this focusing on today reasons is one way to change your time perspective in diabetes. But it applies to a lot of areas. And there are other things in the mindset chapter, I think, that touch on this, like this idea of process versus outcome goals is something I talk about later in the book. So you could imagine, like, I have a goal to get an A1C of 7% by December versus I'm getting after meals and take action on the number. And so the first one is what I call an outcome goal. Like if there's an outcome, I'm trying to hit it. And then the second one is what I call a process goal. Like I check my blood sugar. And the cool thing, I'm a big fan of process goals. So check my blood sugar after meals, because often the larger outcome gets served. But you have a very actionable process that you can follow to serve that outcome. And you don't feel like a failure if you miss the overall outcome. Like if my A1C is 7.5 in December, like I feel really disappointed because I didn't hit my goal. But if I'm checking my blood sugar consistently after meals, like often the outcome is served, but there's an actionable process I can follow. So yeah, I don't know, that's a bit all over the place, but I love this idea of like different time perspectives and how we apply them to diabetes.
No, and I think it's very smart, and it's going back to that today. If you know that you put in the work every single day, you shouldn't be afraid. Of course, there are things that we can't control, but if you know that you are managing your type 1 diabetes or your diabetes the best you can, chances will get lower. I also like there are no good and bad numbers. That's something that for a lot of people, it's so difficult to understand. Oh, that's such a bad number. It's just a number. It's giving you information. It's telling you, hey, you need to do something, either correct or you need to treat something, but it's not good or bad. And I think once we start adding that positive or negative characteristic to things, our attitudes toward that number, it's going to be the same.
Yeah, I totally agree. The analogy I use in the book is this idea of a pilot flying a plane. And if the pilot is checking the instruments, is like, oh, wow, the plane's going a little bit fast, or the plane's going off course. Like the pilot changes something, he changes the way the plane's going, or, assuming it's not an autopilot. But he doesn't say to himself like, my God, I'm a bad pilot, because the reading on the thing is off. And so I think, that's something we should apply to diabetes too. I mean, the number is for learning and action and doing something. It's not a value judgment on your ability to manage your diabetes. And something I've written a lot about and write about in the landmine section of the chapter is this idea of perfectionism. And then when you actually look at it, like there are more than 22 things that impact your blood sugar. And many of them are impossible to account for. And the combinations of them are impossible to account for. So what about like today, third day of my infusion set, hours of sleep last night. I didn't get to exercise this morning, but I ate a low carb breakfast. I mean, like, how am I going to model all that? Like, it's impossible. And so I think one of my mindset landmines is actually striving for perfection and then feeling crappy when I don't achieve it. And it always is a helpful reminder to me to say, wow, diabetes is so complicated and I'm doing my best. And look at all these things that impact blood sugar. And let me just focus on the really big ones that seem to drive diabetes landmines.
I have another question that it's very related to this chapter, but I want to leave it until the end because I think it's a very powerful message. So chapter 3, exercise. This one, a lot of people are like, I really don't like to do exercise. How can we motivate people? Like, I try to explain people, exercise doesn't mean that you have to go to the gym every single day. It means that you go out, walk around the park, walk around your neighborhood, walk your dog, ride your bike. How can we let people know that we actually need to do something? And it's not only for people with diabetes.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, the first the first exercise bright spot is walking, and there's a reason for that. So it has a huge positive impact on blood sugar. It doesn't require equipment. It doesn't require a fancy gym membership. You know, you can, depending on where you live, but for the most part, most people can find somewhere safe to walk. And we have a treadmill desk in our office, so I can write my articles while walking, which is amazing.
I want one.
They're so cool. And I share a link in the book on how you can build your own DIY one at home. So you don't have to have a fancy, like, multi-$1,000 treadmill desk. But I think walking is really, really powerful. And a lot of the bright spots in the exercise chapter actually are ways to walk more. So like wearing a tracking device like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit. Like for me, it's really motivating because I just like love achieving things. So even if they're completely arbitrary, like getting 10,000 steps, like getting that little psychological boost is really helpful. Or adopting a dog. Like once I adopted a dog, like now I have walking built into my routine at the two hardest times of day, which is in the morning and after dinner. So I walk during those two times, which really helps with blood sugars, which is awesome. So I think one of the landmines in the exercise chapter is this idea of the all or nothing mentality, which I think is what you're asking about. Oh my God, I don't have an hour, I can't exercise. Or, oh my God, like I'm not fit. Like, how can I go to some fancy exercise class? And the thing that I focus on, because I have a crazy busy schedule all the time, trying to cover the world of diabetes and share articles in Diatribe, and so things are always nuts, is 5 minutes of exercise beats 0. So if I can do 5, I'm winning because it's better than 0. And 0 is what I'm going to do on my busiest, craziest days. So can I just do better than 0? And that to me is so liberating. Like if I just get 5 minutes of exercise in, then I'm winning. And I think half the time exercise is just about being consistent rather than about having a crazy 60 minutes, dripping in sweat. Like I would rather do 10 minutes of exercise per day, 7 days a week, than 70 minutes on Sunday, because the consistency piece of it is so key. And having that like mindset boost, and this is another classic example of today versus long-term, like exercise is often positioned as do it because you'll live longer, or do it so you don't have heart disease. But most of the benefits to exercise, I think, come from today. Like my blood sugars are more in range, I'm happier and less stressed, or if I feel stressed, I can go exercise and feel less stressed. I can spend time with loved ones, my girlfriend and I go on walks after dinner if my blood sugar is high. So I think there's so many ways to make exercise more enjoyable. And I think some of it is just like kind of reducing the bar for what counts as exercise. Other ways are just like combining activities. So I like listening to podcasts during exercise, TED Talks. I listen to audiobooks. I talk about this amazing app I discovered called Overdrive, which if you have a library card, you can check out audiobooks for free on Overdrive. And so I just crank through books, which, one of the things I love the most is learning. So exercise is a great time for me to learn. So I think there's lots of ways to combine things and make exercise more fun and less of a thing you dread. So that's a big piece of what that chapter is about.
And that's one of the reasons we started doing these interviews in podcasts, because we found out that people were using it to go out while they were walking and doing things like that.
Nice.
As you mentioned, sometimes it could be my busiest day at work, but I need those 40 minutes to go out, like do my walk or my run, and then I'll be back and I feel even better than when I left. I think that also you need some motivation. Find a friend, family member, or someone, because there are days that you're very tired, but that you need to get out of of your routine and do something for yourself. So now let's talk about a little bit about how to manage your type 1 diabetes while doing exercise, because that's something that, and this is something that we've been learning and trying to perfection. With our son, he practices every day for 3 hours. So we know that we have to do lower basals. We know the kind of food. There are a lot of things that we have to prepare ahead of time. But sometimes people say, okay, I'm going to start doing exercise. They have type 1 and they start running, and then at the middle of the run, they have to stop because, oh my God, I have a low blood sugar. Yeah. And then I think those are landmines that hurt people whenever they're trying to make that plan, because they're like, okay, so I'm running, but then after I run, I go low and I need to eat so many calories, so it's not working for me. How can they manage that?
Yeah. One quick interjection. So I've been really focused on this book for type 1 and type 2 diabetes and even pre-diabetes. And so if you read the book, my bio doesn't mention that I have type 1 diabetes. The intro doesn't mention it. And it's not that I'm trying to hide the fact that I have type 1. It's actually that I don't want to isolate people who have type 2, because I know that 95% of this book can actually benefit people with type 2 diabetes. Yeah. So there are a couple bright spots and landmines that do talk about insulin dosing and how I do it. But if you have type 2 diabetes and are listening, or if you have pre-diabetes, I promise you will get a lot out of this book. And so that's just like a caveat I like to make, because I actually want anyone with diabetes who can benefit from it to know that there's good stuff in here for them. But on the insulin dosing with exercise, a huge thread of the book is this idea of personal experimentation. Like, let me try something, see how it works, check my glucose, repeat, see how it works. And so I think there are a lot, all of us can try that, and we all do exercise differently. So, some people, their blood sugar spikes during exercise. Some people it plummets. Some people it doesn't change, but it goes really low overnight. And so they need to change their basal rates. And the second bright spot in the exercise chapter gives people a 3 questions that they can ask, and a process that I try to take them through to figure out, like, how much does exercise change my blood sugar? And then how can I alter what I'm eating now or what my insulin is to stay in range during exercise and after. But I think one of the most helpful things is to just have a rough sense of how exercise changes your blood sugar. So for me, I know walking generally drops me by about 1 milligram per deciliter per minute. So if I'm doing a 30-minute walk, I'll probably drop about 30 points. Now, every day's different. So some days I might drop 60, some days I might not drop at all. But having a rough sense of 30 gives me a pretty helpful starting point. So I know if I'm starting a 30-minute walk and I'm at 70, like, I am definitely, almost certainly going to go low. I mean, there's almost no question. And then from there, I know exactly how much I need to eat to get up to my pre-exercise target and then stay in range during exercise. And then, so having these personal guidelines, and I know biking, for instance, drops me by about 2 milligrams per deciliter per minute. So if I'm doing a 30-minute bike ride, I'll probably drop from 60 points. So I'll drop from 200 to 140, or from 140 to 80. And then the second piece of that is, what do I need to eat and when to adjust my glucose level? So I know that glucose tabs raise me by about 5 milligrams per deciliter per gram. So 1 tab raises me 20 points. So if I'm at 100 and I eat 1 tab, I'll go up to about 120. Or if I'm at 100 and I eat 2 tabs, I'll go up to about 140. And again, like, it's never perfect, but I know that if I'm doing a bike ride that's going to be an hour, like, I know exactly roughly how much I need to eat to get up to a certain target and then end exercise in target. I think some of the mistakes that I made, and everyone's different, but changing your pump basal rate if you're wearing an insulin pump is, you have to do that an hour before exercise, really. Because insulin it takes 60 to 90 minutes to have an effect on your glucose. So if you change your basal rate now, it won't do anything for 60 to 90 minutes. So one of the landmines is, oh, I'm about to start basketball practice. This is what I would do as a teenager. Oh, I'm going to start basketball practice. Like suspend the pump, suspend it all during exercise, and then I would go sky high after exercise, which is actually not surprising at all, because I just suspended insulin while I'm active, and then all that insulin is now suspended and not influencing my glucose after exercise is over. So the solution to that is either suspend the pump before exercise starts, like at least an hour before, or reduce your basal rate, or eat a little bit to get up and then let exercise plus your basal bring you down. So there's no, like, what makes exercise hard and why I spent so much time on that chapter is like, there's no one size fits all criteria. So a lot of that chapter is actually like, here's a framework to manage your blood sugar during exercise, and then apply this toolkit to your life with diabetes. I think the other mistake I used to make, and I don't anymore, is eating too close to exercise. So if you eat close to exercise shuts down digestion.
Mm-hmm.
So if you eat like a sandwich 10 minutes before exercise, like it won't raise your glucose. It'll just sit in your stomach, and then you'll exercise and probably go low during exercise. And then you go high after exercise once all the food hits, which is not good. So if I'm eating close to exercise, it's always glucose tabs. It's always something fast, something I can like eat the right amount and no more. You know I have friends who use juice or other things like that, but trying different foods and then varying the timing of those foods is really helpful.
And as you said, I believe that managing diabetes is just trial and error. What works for you won't work for me or work for another person. So we all have that. And I think that's why it's so important to be able to recognize the things that you're doing correctly, the things that that need improvement, so you can go ahead and make that plan. Because I'm pretty sure that if we ask 20 people, what are your bright spots and your landmines, they're going to be different.
Yes.
We're going to have some that are going to be very similar, but we all struggle with different things. It could be because of our lifestyle, jobs we have, and things like that. But that it's a great topic to be talking about. And this is something that we can be talking about it for days because exercise is super important. Let's talk about sleep. Why do I have to care about sleep when I live with diabetes? My 14-year-old asked me, like, what does that have to do with diabetes? I'm like, you're still 14, you're fine. Like, but sleeping is important, especially as you get older. What are the main takeaways on this chapter?
Well, I think it's funny. I actually start that chapter with a little blurb, like, why is sleep even in this book? Like we don't, if you think of like, okay, food and the way you think about diabetes and exercise is this like 3 legs of the stool for diabetes. Like, what else do you need besides medication, of course? And sleep is this like unsung hero of diabetes, and it has a huge impact on next day blood sugars and on so many other bright spots and landmines in the book. So one of the reasons it's in there is just because, like, if I don't sleep enough, like, my blood sugars will be worse the next day. So I will have higher blood sugars. I'll need more insulin to cover meals and to cover my blood sugars and to keep it in range. And then more broadly, like, I will be more tired, so I won't exercise as much or as hard. There's very good research to show that people make worse food choices when they're sleep deprived. So more diabetes, more food landmines in your day if you haven't slept enough. So sleep is just this very important thing in diabetes. And then, of course, your blood sugars during sleep influence your blood sugars the next day. So if you've ever had one of those days where, and I had one of these days yesterday, like I was 200 all night. I woke up at 200. And then my blood sugar was very high all day, even though I kept taking insulin and doing it. And so things always like bleed together in diabetes. Like, I kind of call this like when it rains, it pours. Like when you wake up high, you're more likely to be high. Like if you wake up low, you're more likely to be low the whole day. So the sleep chapter is it's kind of like the exercise chapter in that it's tips to sleep better. So like, what should your bedroom environment be, or how much light exposure should you have at night, things like that. And then also diabetes strategies around sleep. And one of the big ones, which we touched on a bit earlier, is just how much am I eating at night and when am I eating? And one of my diabetes landmines is just overeating too much right before bed, snacking too much, things like that. And so having that light dinner and then having my basal rate so that I'm just not expecting to eat after dinner is really helpful. And then just not overcorrecting lows. Again, going back to the hypoglycemia binge, like having the right amount and no more.
Especially at night, that you are even more tempted to say, you know what, I'm going to eat the entire box of crackers because I just want to go to sleep. I'd rather be high than low. Believe me, especially when you're very tired, you've had a long week or things like that.
Yeah.
So we are going to be doing a giveaway at Diabetes Hands Foundation. We're going to be giving out 5 of these amazing books. They are the paperback edition from Amazon. Adam already mentioned the images are not in color, but you're going to be able to read the entire book and learn about your bright spots, identify your landmines, and create that plan. Adam, was it difficult for you to sit down and look at all your landmines and say, yikes, I do have landmines, and go ahead and make them public?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny when you write about diabetes and you share your story, like it doesn't get easier. I think like it's still, every column I write is still like a little bit scary. Certainly like publishing the book was scary. And I have lots of, I've written lots of columns in Diatribe, and a lot of the ideas in this book have come in some form or another in other things I've written. But yeah, it's very scary to make yourself vulnerable and to make yourself vulnerable about your own diabetes. And so I think that was scary, but at the same time, I knew that it was critical. I mean, I had to share my successes and my mistakes and be honest about that, because it's not real if it's just a book of bright spots, And so I think that was very important to me. Like, yes, bright spots are more important than landmines, but hey, we all have diabetes landmines, and we should acknowledge them and point them out and then build a plan around them so that we stumble on them less often.
And actually, where we need help, it's with our landmines.
Yeah.
We don't need help with our bright spots. We're doing things right. Where we're stuck sometimes, it's, okay, I know I'm doing this the wrong way, but how do I change my behavior? And that was very brave. So thank you so much for doing that. So where can people purchase the book? You already mentioned that earlier today, but we want to make sure that people know.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you go to diatribe.org/brightspots, that's the book website. So you'll find the link to get, if you want the PDF of the book, you can get it. It reads really well on a tablet or a computer or a phone, and that's free. Or you can name your own price, and everything from this book goes to the Diatribe Foundation. It's a nonprofit. I don't get anything from sales of this book, and I was very, very intentional about that. So that's why there's no publisher. It's not $30 to get this book. So you can get it free if you want, or you can name your own price and donate whatever you like. You can get a paperback on Amazon. So there's actually 2 paperbacks on Amazon. There's one for about $6, which is black and white inside, but still looks awesome. And then there's a full color one, which is $16.99. And those are both priced at cost. So Diatribe and I don't make any money from those. They're the lowest possible price we can charge. And it's actually pretty expensive to print books. So that's the lowest we could make it. So those are both on Amazon. Just search Bright Spots and Landmines. And then there's a Kindle version too. So if you just search Bright Spots and Landmines, you'll find it. And yeah.
So once we edit this video, you're going to go ahead and be able to see those links that Adam just mentioned at the bottom of this page. And you can just go ahead and click there. So my final question, you finished the book by saying, don't do diabetes alone. That alone word, it's so important. Any tips for those who feel they don't have that support from family or friends?
Yes. Well, I think there's a few. One is I talk about how important family can be in your diabetes and loved ones. And so there's a bright spot in the mindset chapter that focuses on that. And I think having family members read a book like this actually would be helpful. Having them do a day or a week of diabetes is really helpful, so they understand, like, oh my gosh, like, here's how much stuff you're doing. Having just family on your side with diabetes makes a really big difference. But outside of that, let's say, like, your family's on your side, but you still feel alone. There is a lot of support out there, but sometimes it can be scary to find it or hard to reach out. So, the online community is amazing for people who that's a fit for. So whether that's sites like TuDiabetes or TuDiabetes, whether that's just information sharing sites like Diatribe, tweet chats, forums. There's tons of Facebook groups. There's closed groups. There's open groups. There's big groups and small groups. And then there's tons of in-person events. So there's local JDRF and ADA events. There's Friends for Life every year in Orlando, right in your neck of the woods. So there's just a lot, and and there's local support groups too that many people hold. So if you feel alone, ask your diabetes educator where to go, ask your healthcare provider, ask your local JDRF or ADA, or go online and just be a lurker and just lurk, and you don't have to post anything or share anything or write a book about your diabetes. Just see what people are saying. And I think it's an amazing time that we live in, that it's never been easier to connect with other people, and no one with diabetes should feel alone. And I know that's a huge mission of DHF and something that you guys work on every day. So,
and that's something that we want to make sure people know. It's overwhelming to do diabetes by themselves. But we are out there, like Diatribe, Diabetes Hands Foundation, JDRF. We just want to make sure that people know where to go. And as you mentioned, you can be a lurker, you can read. And once you start reading, you're going to see yourself in a lot of those messages. You're going to be like, that's how I feel. And you start reading and learning. And you're going to get to the point that you're going to feel comfortable and say, okay, this is my first post here. It took me some time to start talking about our own experience, and now we can't shut our mouth, but it's good. It's good talking about how you feel about your struggles. I think it makes everyone feel better, and it also, in your case, sharing your landmines and how to tackle them. It's a great way for other people to learn. So you're using your vulnerability, how you said it before, to help other people. And I think that's the beauty of the Diabetes Online community. So we are in our last couple of minutes. Closing thoughts, Adam.
Well, I just want to thank you for having me on and sharing the book and reading it and being so enthusiastic. It's been an honor and a privilege to work on this and to bring it to people. And the feedback's been amazing so far. And the thing that I literally care the most about is just that it reaches as many people as possible. So I every day I check, like, how many people have downloaded it, how many people have purchased one of the copies, because like that is my metric for success. Like, is this book getting into people's hands and is it helping them? So please, if you haven't downloaded it, take a look, see what you think. You can look at it for 20 minutes, read the chapter summaries. I tried to write the most actionable book possible so that anyone can pick it up and improve something. And it's been an awesome, fun thing to work on, and I'm excited to bring it to more people and to share the message as widely as possible.
Awesome. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing your experiences and for giving us that hope that we have, like, hey, there's something I can do. There's actually things that I can work on every single day to make my management better. So we have come to the end of today's episode of TuDiabetes Talks. Don't forget, Diabetes Hands Foundation, as we mentioned, has 2 online communities, one in English called TuDiabetes.org and in Español, TuDiabetes.org. They are both completely free. We want to make sure that everyone that has been touched by diabetes, either it's family, loved ones or the person living with diabetes, don't feel alone. We know there's a lot of things going on, a lot of questions, and we're here. We want to make sure you know that. Remember, this interview is going to be available as a podcast. So whenever you go out walking, as Adam told you to do, you can go ahead and download our podcast and listen to them. We have very good information there. So this is all for now. See you in our next interview. Thank you so much, Adam. Have a great week and looking forward to see you soon in June.
Thank you, Mila.
Take care.
Bye.